Welcome to Old Iron Machine Works. In this video, I will be removing 12 studs from this large turbocharger off of a Yenbacher engine. Half the studs are broke, and the remainder of the rest of the studs are pretty messed up. The engine that the turbo is off of is identical to this particular engine here. This engine here will be sent out to be rebuilt. It is basically just a core, but I'm just showing it as far as for the turbo. It's a twin turbo, one on each side, and basically the same turbos that I will be removing the studs out of. These turbos have some insulated blankets around them, and the heat just makes them incredibly hard. And right now, I actually had to cut a tap in half, shorten it up, just to try to clean up 3 of the threaded holes, which are nothing more than just pusher bolt holes to remove the spacer. And just everything is extremely hard. Now, removing the studs and doing a repair on this turbo only has to make it just a few months. They have it scheduled out to swap out with a Recon engine, which comes complete, new turbos and the whole bit. And generally speaking, the companies that do these turbos, they pretty much start out by cooking them in the oven just to get them where they can, work it, because they do get so hard. And I've already taken the torch and I've heated all the way around the base where the studs are, knowing that I probably wouldn't succeed. They're just stuck so tight. I'll end up snapping them off and then having to go in with a carbide. And you can see here, how they snap off. On these turbos, they're clearly not like just removing broken studs and broken bolts and in other applications. Because of the turbo and the heat that they see, everything is pretty much welded together, hard as a rock. You got to use carbide all the way. And on this particular turbo, not only are the studs bottomed all the way out, but it's already been machined out, helicoiled, the stud screwed all the way in, bottomed out in the helicoil. And now where I got to drill it out, I have to drill it out, and stay within the inside of the helicoil. If you've ever messed around with any kind of helicoils, the helicoils themselves are very hard, so the carbide, if it catches any part of the existing helicoil, it wants to knock the edge off. But the number one goal for me here is don't break off a carbide down in a hole, because I would have no way of getting in and out. Taps and stuff you can kind of soften up and drill them out with good carbide. But once you break the carbide off inside, then they got to be sent somewhere else, to get them removed. Here I'm using a round nose carbide, 1/4 inch. And what I'm doing is just finding a good center. And then once I got a good center in it, then I switch over to the carbide drill and then start drilling. Here I'm using just slightly little larger carbide drill bit just to get down through the harder portion of it. The deeper I get into the stud, the softer it gets. And then I just switch over, and at that point, run a smaller carbide drill just to get a pilot hole and get it all the way through the stud. Now normally these studs would only screw in about 3/8 of an inch deep, and they're a 10 millimeter by 1/5 thread. And when they helicoiled these, they should have got a pretty deep helicoil, and then they have probably 5/8 of an inch deep stud, so there's hardly any clearance at all from the bottom of the stud to the main housing. Now here, just getting a pilot hole drilled all the way around on all the studs. Definitely got to have patience. It's really easy to get impatient and want to start crowding it or pushing it, and it doesn't take much. Carbide's extremely hard, which you need to drill the hard material, but it's also very brittle, which means it can snap off pretty easy also. Here I'm just trying to keep the chips out of the hole. I don't need the chips inside wanting to, start balling up around the bit and break the bit. Now all this carbide when I started was perfect. If it wasn't new, it was close to it. And just to get to the point where I have right now, and you can see where, it's been kind of knocking a lot of edges off. But as long as I don't break them, I'm happy. You can definitely tell, like right now, I'm starting to bring up some small chips, a little darker in color, and that's where I got past the stud and then just started getting into the housing of the turbo. Here's after I've went over to the carbide grinder and kind of touched the bit up a little bit. Whenever I'd knock the edge off, I'd grind a little bit more off of it. Here I'm stepping it up to 1/4 inch carbide end mill. Once I get a basic pilot hole going, I'm pretty much done with any kind of drill bit. One thing about a drill bit, it will follow an existing hole, where with an end mill, it won't. You can be off center, and however it's lined up is how it's going to cut. This end mill was actually working pretty good for me. It was cutting pretty good, and it fit right down, right in the center of the helicoil. No problem. Now here's a pretty good shot where you could see what's left of the threads of the stud, and you could clearly see the helicoil. Now on the studs that actually broke off, they were much harder at the surface, and this end mill here actually seemed to be doing a little bit better job on the harder material. Now this is where the Bridgeport's real nice for dealing with the broken studs. You can see right here what I'm doing is just doing a visual, and when I can see the threaded line, then I can just make small adjustments on the table, the Bridgeport, and just move it over slightly until I find my center. Normally carbide inside of an all-bright chuck isn't really the best way to go because you got two hard surfaces. But in this particular application, it's kind of my built-in little safety, as you've seen right there. If that carbide decides to want to grab at the bottom, it's gonna slip in the chuck before it snaps it off. If that was in a R8 collet or something, there's a good chance it would have just broke it off. Here you can see a couple chips in a couple of the flutes, but it's still cutting. I'm at the final size of the end mills that I'm using. This particular end mill here seems to cut pretty decent on the surface, so I'm starting with it and then I switch over to the other style. Here we got the very bottom of the stud stuck to the bottom of the end mill. Well, I got it all drilled out without breaking off any carbide inside. And now I'm just going to start peeling out what's left of the studs. And what I'm pulling out right now is the old helicoil. Now I'm going to go ahead and remove all the old helicoils and put new ones in. Now this is part of the stud that was down below the helicoil. Well, here I got all the broken pieces out and all the old helicoils out, and I'm just waiting for a new helicoil kit to show up where I can clean the threads out and install the new helicoils and studs. And here's ready to go back out, go back on the unit, and hopefully it'll hold up for a few months until they swap the engine out. I thought I'd throw in another little project off of the same, well, actually a little different model, but Jenbacher engines. These are some exhaust elbows that get chewed out pretty bad. And I go and I cut and roll out a piece of metal that goes around there and then weld it up. And they actually bought a brand new one for a spare that did not have those angle brackets that mount the whole thing up on the engine. So I needed to make a couple of them and jig it up and get them welded up to the elbow. So here I already got the patch on it, and we went ahead and welded a patch right on the new one because we know they eat out. So we figured now's the time to do it. And now I'm just fitting up some new angle pieces. What I'm using to make these, you can see the round radius, so I basically used some square tubing, and I cut a section of tubing off, and it was actually 3/8 wall thickness. The original one was 5/16 wall thickness, but that doesn't really mean anything. And then here I'm just putting the slots in for where it mounts up. Here I'm just making a couple jig pieces that I can tack right to the welding table. So when I go to weld the new ones on, I'll have them aligned in the right spot. And here I need to make some little spacers that will drop down to flange holes that I can also tack weld right to the bench. Alright, here I got my little spacers ready to tack into place and ready to tack up the square tubing. To me, it's important to always have a welding table that you can actually weld to, and then just grind it off when you're done. Now this side fit pretty good. Once I bolted it up, you can see just a small little gap. This side here's a little bit on the tight side, so I got to do a little bit of grinding. And now we got it fit up pretty nice and ready to start welding. And we got the inside welded on the upper and lower portion of it. And now I'll unbolt it and then go ahead and seam it up right there. And we now have it all welded up, ready for a little grinding and ready for paint. And here we kind of got it ground flat again, ready for the next project. As always, I appreciate you taking the time to check out the video. And thank you to my new subscribers. Anybody that stumbles across my channel that's not a subscriber, and if you like this content, go ahead and subscribe and hit the bell. Thumbs up are always appreciated. Once again, thank you for your time for checking out the video.